Now that we've replaced the carburetor on our Ryobi pressure washer, it's time now to replace the pump. So one thing to note is that the mounting bolts that hold the pump onto the frame of the pressure washer are the same bolts that are holding the engine onto the frame as well. So they share all three mounting points. So when we remove these, we want to try to keep this in an upright position as best as possible without moving it so that the engine doesn't shift or fall off. So to start, we're going to need a 1/2-inch wrench to hold the nut on the top side and a 1/2-inch socket to remove the bolt. And if we're lucky, the pump will slide right off, just like it did there. In most cases, because of these being in harsher conditions with water running into it, water does seep down into the input shaft and on the drive shaft of the motor. These tend to rust, kind of weld themselves to each other. So what we recommend is using a penetrating oil, getting a good soak within the drive shaft and input shaft of the pump, and then applying some pressure and slowly work that off if it doesn't come off perfectly the first time. So once we have this off, it's time to go on to the next step. Next, we're going to remove the key and then take some sandpaper and clean off the drive shaft. We're going to want to have a nice clean mating surface, especially for those units where the pump stuck to it. You need to make sure all the abrasion and rust is taken care of. Once we clean the shaft, we'll want to use a cleaner on a rag and just wipe up any of the excess. Before we go on to the step of installing our new pump, we do want to put some anti-seize compound over the drive shaft of the motor. This is going to make it a lot easier later on down the road if ever you do need to remove the pump. That way it doesn't stick to it and rust again. Now, because this is a rear-facing pump, and for ease of installation, we'll want to move our keyway facing back towards us as best as possible. And we'll insert our key onto the drive shaft. We want to insert it in a way so that when we do install the pump, if it does slide up on us, it has a little bit of room to give. Because the worst thing we want is to have this slide completely out, get jammed up on the top side of the drive shaft, and cause damage to the oil seal of the engine itself, or it can cause failure on your pump by breaking the input shaft because it binds up. Now that we have the key onto the shaft of the motor, we want to prep our pump for an easier installation. With this being a rear-facing pump, your notch on your input shaft needs to face kind of between your inlet and outlet tubes here. That way you can align it with the key as best as possible before installing it. Next step, slide it onto the shaft. So as you bring it to the shaft, line up the key to the keyway of the pump. And like I said, we want to make sure that this key does not slide in any way. So either you hold it with your finger in place, or another kind of tip is to use a small rubber band on the top side, and that'll help hold it into place as well, ensuring that it doesn't slide out. Once we have this pump in, we'll want to take our mounting bolts through the leg. Now that we have the bolts finger tight onto the frame holding the engine and the pump into place, we'll go around with our 1/2-inch wrench and our 1/2-inch socket and tighten these up firmly, just enough to where it is tightened down and it's not going to vibrate loose. You don't want to run the risk of over tightening and potentially cracking one of your legs or the mount on the motor itself. So. Now that we have the pump installed, just want to take one last look around, make sure everything is good. One aspect, again, is going to be the key up here. I want to make sure that it is tightly in place, it's not going to slide, and it hasn't slid up the drive shaft of the motor, potentially causing any binding. This one didn't move while we were installing it, thankfully, so it stayed into place, and now that the pump's installed, it's firmly set, and it didn't slide up. So now that we've got the pump installed, replaced our carburetor, time to hook this up and test out our pressure washer.